What's up, everyone? I'm Nathan Graham Davis, and I'm going to re-break in as a Hollywood screenwriter. Dude, I'm the biggest fuck up. I didn't hit fucking record on this thing, and we've been doing all of this entire time.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. Oh my god. You
know
were
what?
just dropping all sorts of good stuff in there.
3 minutes in, I'm like, this is the worst fucking interview because I am just like, I'm not good at the Zoom thing. So I'm like, where am I looking? Can you see me? Is the right angle? So maybe this is good practice.
Maybe this is like the start of the actual like episode where I'm like, I wasn't recording and you're like, I didn't like my answer.
Now I know what some of your questions are, and now we've covered it a little bit, and so now at least I know what how to better formulate my responses.
Yeah, oh god, I'm such an amateur with this stuff. Like I can write pretty well, but like when it comes to this YouTube thing, I am just figuring it out as I go.
So I'm a big believer in growth through failure and in the idea that you need to be willing to do something badly if you're ever going to do it well. And it's good that I believe those things because as somebody who continually finds new ways to fuck up, I'd never get anything done if I didn't. I also believe that if you want to do something and it scares the hell out of you, 9 out of 10 times you should do it. And yeah, you might fail. You might fail spectacularly. You might start a YouTube series about trying to re-break in as a screenwriter and then interview somebody for 25 minutes before you realize you didn't hit record. But you know what? You grow through those things. And I know that if I keep on doing this for this whole 26-week series, by the end of it, the worst case scenario is that I'm going to have learned some new skills. I'll have written a new spec script, and yeah, maybe I'll have embarrassed myself publicly, but our culture is so fucking fickle that you're all going to forget about it in a few months. So you know what? I'm all in. And this is week 7 already, which means that I am midway through my outline. And I think this whole idea of needing to be willing to do something badly applies here too. You know, it took me 7 years and more scripts than that to break in the first time around. So that's a lot of failure, right? That's a lot of doing it badly. And that also just applies not just to the mastery of the craft, but to each individual script as well. You know, an outline is something that's supposed to get you to a first draft. And in that process, you find out that the outline doesn't completely work. And then, as Ernest Hemingway said, the first draft of anything is shit. And in my case, that usually applies to drafts 2 and 3 and often 4. So yeah, it takes a lot of grit and stamina to not just be a screenwriter and write a script, but to take that all the way to a career into getting movies made. But I truly believe that that end result is worth it. And so yeah, like I said, I'm all in. So this is week 2 of this mini sub-series on outlining. This week I brought in Martin Aguilera, who's just a fucking awesome writer. As he'll tell you in a couple minutes, he's unproduced at this point, but he has got some incredibly exciting stuff in the works. And as you'll see, I brought him in on this one for a very specific reason.
All right, anyway.
So are we doing a formal intro again or what?
I actually think it'd be funnier if I added a little bit of this shit in.
Oh my God. Yeah. You know what? This is your show. I will let you do whatever.
Dude, well, I mean, like we're collaborating. So yeah. All right. Well, all right. So we just had a conversation about everything that you've been doing in the last several years. And then we talked about outlining for a while. And then I realized I hadn't hit record yet. And so none of that has been captured.
Here.
Which is awesome. But, you know, as I was saying right at the beginning, so obviously, like, we've been friends for a long time, but I've been out of this business for a long time. And, you know, for the last couple of years, we've mostly just been staying in touch because we've been, like, either exchanging our short stories for notes or just for fun or geeking out about books or just kind of shooting the shit. And I had no idea about all these cool things that you've had going on in film, which is just so awesome. So I was getting back into this myself a couple months ago, and I was listening to a ton of podcasts just kind of to immerse myself in screenwriting again. And I was listening to Scripts and Scribes and Kevin was interviewing Adam Robitel, who, you know, dropped your name out of nowhere as this great friend of his who was the one that convinced him to start outlining. He wasn't an outliner before, and now he is because of Martin. And I know that I'm going to be doing this episode several weeks out about outlining, and so instantly like the dots connect, and I'm like, I got to get Martin to do this thing with me, because that would be awesome. So I literally pulled over because I was commuting and texted you like, dude, I just heard your name on a podcast, and which was awesome. So
it was
but
awesome. Adam's very generous.
So can you give like the bullet points of what it is that you've been up to in the film world for like, I don't know, the last 5 years?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I've been, you know, I'm still like many folks out there. I am still an unproduced screenwriter, but have been working just diligently behind the scenes, writing television pilots, writing independent films. I've been hired and commissioned by independent producers to write pilots for, you know, projects that they've approached me on. I've been consulting with some of my filmmaker friends on their projects, which have actually gotten made. Like Adam's, you know, Adam's projects have gotten out there. We give each other feedback. We trade outlines. We trade script notes, drafts. You know, all the back and forth that entails. And I've just sort of been doing the hustle and while doing, you know, my day job. So
and you've got a manager who you've been with for a couple of years now, who's hooked up a couple of really cool things as well, it sounds like. What's her name again?
her name is Chris Coggins. She's at
Coggins.
European Villains Entertainment. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. And I'd met her a couple of years before when she was working for Luc Besson, and then went off and joined Heroes and Villains. And yeah, I had been in between managers, and we had a meeting, and she picked me up. So
awesome. So can we get into why Adam Robitel, who already was really successful before he was an outliner, thinks that you're the guy that convinced him to start outlining? Like what makes your process like so special, or just what makes you such a convincing salesperson that you were able to get him to start?
Well, listen, Adam certainly doesn't need my help when it comes to writing, you know, quality material or designing quality storytelling. But I don't think necessarily that, it's just maybe his approach to outlining was different than my approach. And I think so many of us, you know, because I think he was very much into like the Blake Snyder, Save the Cat, you know, of screenwriting. I'll be honest, I think I've only ever read 1 or 2 screenwriting books in my life. And I understand that there are sort of similarities between many of them. And I just kind of developed my own approach, which is, I think of screenwriting as like a symphony. And I know this is incredibly geeky, but I've always thought, you know, if a script should be around, a feature film script should be around 100 pages, then think of it as a symphony, and every 10 pages is a movement of that symphony. So design the story in that way so that you've got the plot moving along in a way that every 10 pages you have something exciting. And now by that, I don't mean have an explosion. It doesn't have to be a murder or a sex scene or anything, but just do something when you get to that 10-page crescendo that turns you on to the next moment, whether it's a revelation, a character detail, or it could be an explosion, you know, depending on what it is that you're designing. But that's how I design my screenwriting. So I think Adam had his own approach to screenwriting, but I think, you know, probably what he meant by that was just sort of maybe taking some of what I do and maybe just kind of infusing it into his own storytelling.
So when you're outlining, like you mentioned crescendo. So are you actually doing like, you're kind of building up to a peak and then dropping and like doing this the whole time, or?
Not necessarily dropping, because I think if you don't want to end up having, you know, lulls in your story,
sure.
I think it's more of like connecting to the next. I mean, you could even think of it not necessarily as a straight line, but like an ascending line, you know, so that it's just escalating up and you're moving the story along, you know, up to the next thing, up to the next level, up to the next level. But that's just how my mind works. You know, I'm really not good at following directions, and I'm really bad at like, oh, you know, here's like your third act or break into second act and all of that. I've just never thought of screenwriting I sort of have had an aversion to not thinking about writing as it's not a math equation, you know, storytelling, creativity, the way your mind works. I think so many people try to compact it into like a formula, and you know, that just doesn't work for me. I feel like I feel like I'm trying to, at that point I feel like it's a little bit of paint by the numbers, right? Like, you know, you're just trying
Totally.
to do what so many others have done, and the way that, and it very may well be that that is just the nature of storytelling, that that is what it is, but the way I've tricked myself into not believing that is by sort of following this process.
Yeah, man. I mean, so in doing these conversations, because I think this is number 7.
Okay.
Um, I mean, that's what I keep hearing over and over again, right? Is like how important it is to be infusing like yourself into your story, right? Like you know, yeah, I mean, like structure's the thing and whatever, um, and it all matters, but like there has to be an element that is specifically you and that you're passionate about and that you're bringing to the table,
Right.
or it's going to fall flat. And this is stuff that's like I know this, like I've learned this, I've written a few good scripts over time, but it's like I think I needed to be reminded of it again, you know.
Yeah.
So it's been cool to have these conversations with everybody for sure. I like the analogy of a symphony too, and I think that's a really fair one. Um, and so you're specifically thinking in like 10-page blocks. Do
And
you go
because
outside of that too, or?
I do, and I'm a strict believer that a story will dictate how it wants to be written. There's just, I mean, you cannot wrangle the imagination. You know, a story sometimes wants to get out, and I'm sure, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but you get an idea and you start jotting down a few notes, and then the next thing you know, like you're like, well, you know, screw these notes. I'm gonna just go to script and start writing it because it flows.
Mhm.
That happened to me a few weeks ago. I was actually having a conversation with my roommate, and we were discussing. Um, he's also a very talented writer. He was just on the Selena show on Netflix. He was a staff writer on
Nice.
that, and so we were just having like a story conversation about a particular kind of character that I haven't necessarily seen on television just yet.
Yep.
And and he's like, well, you know, you're very passionate about this, why don't you just write that script? And you're like, you know what, I probably should. So I was making some notes, but then I stopped you know, the note process, and I just turned to the laptop and started typing, and I banged out half a pilot in like a couple of hours. And
No shit.
yeah, yeah, and honestly, and it was just free flowing, and I had no um I had an ending for the episode in mind, but I did not know, you know, how I was going to get there. I knew what my ending was. And I think ultimately that's why, for me, one of the things that I do like to know is my ending before I start writing, because regardless of how I get there, I kind of have a stopping point. I don't feel like I'm being vague about like my idea, you know, that my idea is not coming together because I don't know what the hell I'm writing towards. So I tend to want to know at least where the stopping point is, where the ending is, because I am writing towards that goal.
And for you, is that like, is that just knowing the final image? Is that knowing the like climax? Is that knowing the whole third act, basically? I mean, what does that mean?
It's knowing what the intention of the plot and the character, where they wind up, how the story, what the resolution of the story becomes, and where my character will be at the end of that resolution. You know, ideally they are there together, and how I get there, I don't have a clue. That's something I work out obviously during the outline, when I'm thinking extensively about the story, when I put it down. And again, like, you know, to answer your earlier question, you know, I feel like stories dictate how they want to be written. um, I don't necessarily lock myself into the 10-page,
Mhm.
you know, symphony process all the time, but I do. I don't know, like that's the most organic one for me.
So,
That's the one that I fall back onto the most.
so when you're doing that, like, what's your outline look like? What's your physical process? Are you, you know, an index card guy? Are you somebody who loads everything onto, you know, whatever program in your computer? How do you work?
No, I actually work with pen and paper, a notebook. And it's hard for me to introduce technology into my creative process.
Mhm.
I just have never really been that person. And I think that just comes from me being the kid who journaled and, kept notebooks and always wanted, was writing short stories in longhand. And I'm still, with a handful of my friends, I am still a letter writer in longhand, instead of email,
Nice. That's cool.
trade letters, and anyway, so it just feels natural to me to think something through and open my notebook. And actually, I have a very nerdy story. When I was in high school, at the dawn of this thing called the internet, um, I reached out to Wes Craven. And Wes Craven is one of my favorite directors. He's one of my heroes. And I basically wanted to know, as a screenwriter, as an aspiring screenwriter then, as a 14-year-old kid, how do you write your scripts? How did you write Nightmare on Elm Street? How do whenever you're writing a script, what is your process? And Wes Craven replied, and he told me that the way that he wrote was he would write one sentence for each scene in a film. And then eventually he would come back and write one paragraph for each of that sentence, essentially fleshing out,
Mhm.
you know, the story itself. And when he completed that process, he had a completed treatment, and then he would work on the treatment and then take it to script. And the whole process for him would take 6 to 8 weeks. So that always stuck with me. It was one of the pieces of advice. And I miss Wes. He's a really good guy. Just who does that, right? Like, you email this big time director and they get back to this kid. But that always stuck with me. And so just writing out bullet point, beats for my story has always been how I start.
So, um, and so you do all this longhand, and so when you've got a finished outline, like it's in a notebook.
Yeah, usually the
That's
beats
cool.
are in a notebook. The one-liner beats are in a notebook. And then what I do is then I'll open up a Word document on my computer, and then I'll start typing out
Load it into there.
load it in there and just start typing out the treatment. And from there,
Does it evolve in that process as well? I assume, like when
oh,
you're,
absolutely. No. The
yeah.
story complete. That is where you do the heavy lifting, I think. Like I said, a story dictates how it wants to be written. Sometimes it just pours out of you and you write a script, and there's just something about the connections that your mind makes that organically, because I think so much of us, of what we do in our business, at least those of us who are storytellers, we're constantly consuming comic books, movies, television shows. So I think so much of structure is ingrained in us anyway. And when
Yeah.
something comes out, and for those of us who have been at it for a while, it just flows. You can just get it done. But yeah, anyway, so sometimes that happens, but rarely. But yeah, I usually like to work on this document, and that's where I do the heavy lifting. And the story can
Awesome.
completely change. Characters can completely change. Entire plot points can completely change. But I know I'm able to read and look at the whole picture. I can't do that with index cards for some reason. And yeah, I like the written word.
I've tried index cards a couple times. I haven't stuck with it. I think my process, and it evolves and it
Yeah.
changes every time a little bit. But it's probably similar to yours in some ways. I always start with pen and paper, and I'm probably going to actually do this today for this script after we stop talking. But basically, like, I'll take a piece of paper,
Yeah.
and I usually kind of think in 4 acts to some degree, and it always evolves by the time I'm done. But that's how I start, and I will draw just 3 lines across the paper so that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 acts, and then I usually know by this point what, like, my ending is and what my midpoint is, and so I can kind of put those 2 things in, and then I usually know my opening image, and I can put that at the beginning, and then I have like a visual in front of me, and then I just started writing notes in, like, and it gets really messy, and I cross stuff out and whatever, but that's usually how I start, and then after that I move to the computer and start building out an actual outline. But it reminds me kind of what you were talking about in some ways, and just kind of starting out with, like, a sentence or something, right? And like just kind of fleshing it out from there with some sort of structure. I really like what you were talking about with the kind of the symphonies and the crescendos, though. And I think that's so cool thinking back to the first act of Erebus that I had just read from you, because I didn't really notice that. Like the structure was really well hidden in there, but that thing just moved. Like, it read so fast, which, by the way, as much as I read, I am just not a fast reader. And that annoys the hell out of me. I wish I was a fast reader, but I'm just not. Like, it takes me a long time to read, I think, because
Yeah.
like I just like to sit with the words and my brain goes on tangents and stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, like I was just so engaged the entire time. It just moved.
Thank you so much.
And so yeah, well, I mean it did, and like it's really cool to kind of hear how you're thinking of that in those 10-page blocks, because it didn't occur to me that that's what you're doing, but obviously it was really effective. So you said like that you take notes before you start that outlining process, right? Like what is that process like for you? How long do you spend on that? Are there certain things that you're trying to discover about your story before you start outlining?
Yeah, and I think I'm usually trying to I I usually, well, it depends. I either start with a plot or I either start with a story. And I'm sorry, I either start with the plot or the character. And so if I start with the plot, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if, somebody got caught up in this scenario and then this happened and then that happened and then it led to this. So I'll try to just work that out, and sometimes like I'll write, I was actually a while back, I had an idea for a screenplay about an architect. And just because I never see architects as characters in films, I'm always seeing, teachers and cops and doctors and lawyers, whatever.
The closest I can think is There's Something About Mary. So
Yeah. But that's been a long time.
But they were fake architects, so it doesn't even count.
Right. And I'm a big geek, so I'm a huge fan of architecture. And I thought, this idea of this character, an architect, and the spaces that he creates and that he's in, wouldn't it be great to sort of maybe drop that character into like a Hitchcockian plot?
Cool.
So I kind of sat down and I wrote out in a notebook, the basic beats for the plot of the screenplay, beginning, middle, end, all of that. But I never named the guy. It was just the architect. So, when that happens, I just work out the plot. And then sometimes the opposite happens, where I think of a character and I'm just thinking of like, okay, well, John Doe, who is this guy? What are his goals? Where does he live? What most interests me, and I feel like, some writers get really intensive with like character bios and things like that. I don't necessarily need to know where my character was born, who his first kiss was, or who she may have, dated or whatever. I'm more interested in, at the point of origin for my story, where are they emotionally, what's happening in their life in that particular moment that creates the momentum for their character arc. So that's
You know what?
that's where I
Go ahead.
No, that's where I start with.
I really like what you just said about like knowing where they are emotionally when everything starts.
Yeah.
That's cool. Like I don't think I've ever heard it like said that way before, but that is obviously something that we should all be striving for, like as we're writing, to like really know exactly where they are emotionally, because everything builds from that point, right?
Right, because that's your intro to this person that now the audience is committed to following for the duration of, the 90 minutes, the 100 minutes, the 120 minutes, or, if you're Steven Spielberg, 2 hours and 40 minutes or whatever, So
that's cool. I mean, that was one of the things that I was going to ask you is, what you need to know about your characters before you start. And, so it's interesting. I was talking to Joe Johnson for this last episode, and he was saying like one thing that he does to try and uncover characters is he has them like he writes out just monologues, like just or even dialogue between them and stuff, to just try and figure out who they are. And I thought that was really cool. And so I tried it. And it was actually like, so it definitely, I learned a ton about my characters that I didn't know, which was great, right? Like that's what I wanted, like including one really important thing about my protagonist and like one of her like emotional needs that is going to drive the story big time. But the downside of doing this for me was that like these scenes sucked. Like I wrote like 5 pages and and I'm just like, man, these are just not good scenes. And this is the first screenwriting I've done in like 3 or 4 years at least. And so I'm just like, can I even do this anymore? You know, what am I doing? And on top of that, I don't know if you caught episode 5 and even know what I'm writing yet. Did you see that yet? Or
no, I didn't.
So okay, so what I'm writing is basically the Sorcerer's Apprentice meets the Witch. It centers around like 2 women who, you know, I've got a younger woman who approaches a, you know, witch, and like they're living in the 15th century, probably, you know, in either Scandinavia or the Netherlands, so a non-English speaking country. And although I'm going to write it in English, I want it to feel as authentic as possible, right? And so, and I want it to feel very grounded, at least at first, until everything starts going to shit. And I'm following kind of a whiplash pattern with this, where the witch is incredibly mean and demanding, and you know, in terms of discipline. And so anyway, as I'm writing out these scenes, something that I already kind of knew was going to be a problem, but I didn't realize how much of a problem, was that I just don't know how these people talk. Like, you know, I want it to feel really grounded, and I have no idea how people in the 15th century, 1400s are going to speak to each other, especially then. So I already knew that I needed to do some research and try and read some materials from around that time and whatnot. But it just kind of really hits home like how much effort I'm going to need to put in this. I have no idea what I was thinking trying to write this script. Like, what's that?
No, as soon as you mentioned that, I'm like, oh, this guy's a glutton for punishment, you know?
Yeah, man. Like, I'm so excited about the story. Like, it's coming together fast. Like, but I have a very public deadline for when I want to have this finished.
Yeah.
And, like,
you do, right?
What was I thinking? Like,
why do it the easy way when you can take the hard way? I mean, why not?
Oh my God.
So, no, by the way, I love what you're doing. I think it's a fantastic, an incredible resource. And I think there's just a lot to be gained from it. So kudos to you, man, for doing that.
Well, thank you for contributing to it in a really important way. So,
and I think... Sorry, I just want to say, you mentioned whiplash right now, and that's sort of something you're thinking towards. I don't know if you know this, but Damien Chazelle, before he wrote and directed Whiplash, had written and sold a couple of horror screenplays. And somebody has pointed out that Damien Chazelle used the structure of horror films to create that kind of tension and momentum that many of us felt watching Whiplash. You know, so we're just like riveted, like, oh my gosh. Anyway, you can impose a horror structure on that movie, and apparently it works.
That's super cool to hear. I mean, yeah, I'm definitely... I don't know. I still don't exactly know what the tone is going to feel like. I don't think I will until I'm actually writing it. But
that was my next question.
What's that?
That was my next question. What's your tone? Yeah,
it'll be dark for sure. You know, is it going to feel like a straight horror movie? I don't think so. I think it'll feel a little bit more dramatic, but it'll definitely be unsettling. You know.
Yeah.
And kind of like building toward a really big climax. I mean, that's the hope anyway.
Well, one of the big notes that I got from Adam Robitel, who's my producer on Erebus, who's going to be my feature film as a director, is that for the best horror always works the best when, you know, if you take away the supernatural element of the story, is the drama of the story itself still compelling?
Sure.
You know? And so, yeah, I mean, I as long as you can make that storyline compelling, and you can make that idea compelling, and raise the stakes for your characters and make the audience feel the stakes and bring them in, and then you just introduce whatever dark tone this is going to have. you should be okay, at least, in execution.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point and something that's really important to remember. This all stemmed from, so when I generated like a shit ton of ideas for this project.
I
I was
remember.
trying to come up with the most marketable possible idea that, for a reasonable budget to just give me the best possible chance of kind of, coming up with something saleable and breaking in as fast as possible. And then, so I fucking
And
talked to
this is where
Malcolm
you end up,
Spellman.
medieval
What?
story.
I know, like it's so stupid. Like, so,
No, I've been through this last year. I, I wrote something that I was incredibly passionate about. It was an adaptation of a novel called The Lion and the Crow, and it was about two medieval knights who go on a quest to save one of the knight's sister, and there's a lot of tension between them. They can't stand each other, but they're sort of compelled together by their needs. And on the course of this journey, they encounter thieves and all this crazy stuff happens. The two guys end up falling in love. I'm so proud of the script. I turn it in, and my representation is like, this is fantastic. We can't really sell this. This is like
yeah. So
medieval gay action film with like brave spectacle and all. It's just, yeah, it's tough. Those are tough to get off the ground.
I know, yeah, it's crazy. Like, so like I was saying, I was talking to Malcolm Spellman about, and he asked me to pitch him a couple of the ideas that I come up with, and he's like, "Dude, you're not passionate about those at all." And he was absolutely right. And so I kind of sat down and said, okay, like what are my favorite movies of the last 10, 15 years? And I
Ooh.
realized that so many of them, had this kind of running theme of this just relentless pursuit of an obsession, like Whiplash, right?
Right.
And as I'm exploring that and recognizing like how much I relate to that, as somebody who's wanted to be a screenwriter for a very long time and has also, sacrificed many things to go after that, and then walked away from it and is now coming back to it. It felt right to be in that space.
Yeah.
And so then I started generating ideas from there. And then I had a conversation with, Ben Lustig and Jake Thornton, and they're like, well, listen, Nate, like if you don't want to write straight action thrillers for the rest of your life, you should write something, with that kind of sci-fi fantasy big idea. And I was like, well, yeah, I was thinking of this idea, Sorcerer's Apprentice meets the Witch. I was going to do it kind of really contained and low budget and, as low as I could. And like Ben's like, well, that idea is scalable. You could go kind of big with that too. And all I can say is that for us, it's worked really well to kind of write the type of script that we want to write. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I don't know, man. I'm just pursuing something that I'm excited about, and we're gonna see how it works. And I have no idea what I was thinking trying something this challenging under this like pressure of a deadline while also doing this series, but here we go. So
I mean, look, I do think it's incredibly passionate to write what you want. And I think, I'll be honest, I think that I've had a lot of people such as yourself and close friends of mine who are very accomplished filmmakers at, film, television, etc., who have constantly told me, we love what you do. We like the way you write. We like the stories you tell and all this and that. But I'm not necessarily writing towards, always what's commercial. And I do tend to write the things that I am passionate about. And I think it's incredibly important to do that. But I think it's also a little hard. And
yeah,
I think, would I be a little further along, if I had taken a different route, maybe, but I don't know, at this point in the game, like, yeah, life's too short. You got to write the stuff that you love. And I think ultimately when you do that, people do respond to whatever it is that you're doing. People will, just embrace it, and I think Ben and Jake are onto something, that when they're telling you to just lean into it.
that's the hope, man. So anyway, that's the way I'm going with it. So I've spent the last, I don't know, week and a half, I guess, with this idea, just so, loading a ton of notes into a document, reading a ton, um, and trying now, I just told you how I was dialoguing the characters and everything, and
Right.
pretty much ready to just start fleshing out an outline now and seeing where this story goes. But yeah, no, I'm excited about it. It's going to be a lot of work, but it should be really fun to develop it for sure. Um,
Yeah.
so, you know,
Lens are essential.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think everybody's got such a different process, and so that's what's really cool is to like to hear how everybody approaches it. Because it does continue to evolve, and I'm interested to try new things. Like
Well, you
I feel good about where I am as a writer, but I can get so much better, and that's definitely my goal is to continue improving.
Well, we should all strive for that. Look, I'm always down to try new things as well. In terms of like the storytelling, there's certain times when I just, yeah, like I said, I just want to write something, and so I'll start writing it. But, you know, a lot of times what will happen is if I don't know that ending, um, I just will, there's a lot of unfinished documents on my computer. Um, and yeah, like outlining just for me became a way to figure out that ending, and to get to it. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So when you're doing your like 10 pages crescendos, right? In your symphony here, are you thinking in terms of like, I need to have a huge turning point at page 50 or anything like that at all, or not at all, huh?
no, I never write to hit a plot point. I never write to hit a mark, or I never write to hit anything like that. That again feels like mathematics to me. It feels a lot
Hmm.
formal. It doesn't feel like natural storytelling. For at least for me, I if it works for anybody, like that's amazing. I wish I knew how to do that. I just don't. Um, I can't write to that. I just write to um either character development or revelation of plots. You know, yeah, I don't know. And I have written like, big, like I wrote a script a couple of years ago called Borderlines, which is like my version of a summer popcorn blockbuster action movie. The kind of movie probably more prominent in like, the 1990s. Um, and I wrote one of those, and when I mapped that out in my treatment, that was like an 8-page treatment. Um, that one I understood where the act breaks came, but I don't know. Yeah, it was never like intentionally done that way. It's so weird. Like I just can't write towards those
I
big
think
spec.
that's awesome. Like,
Really?
I think I read a bunch of books
I
early
think
on,
it's backwards. I don't know. I mean,
and
people constantly tell me like, "You're what? Like, how do you do that?" And I'm like, I just don't know. Like, I mean, the
no, I
story.
think it's
Cool.
cool. I mean,
Yeah.
I definitely feel, like myself wanting to push back on those ideas, and I certainly like. I mean, and when I first started screenwriting, I read a bunch of books, and that's honestly how like I approach anything that I want to do. I
Mhm.
gather a ton of information and learn as much about it as I can.
Right.
And so, when I was
That's
young, like that's how I did it with screenwriting, and I've still got a shitload of books, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but I definitely found as I was, you know, progressing as a writer, myself pushing back on those ideas a lot. But I definitely still think about acts, and I still think about, and I would say it's kind of a chicken or egg thing. Like I usually have an idea that comes up. So like I know what the midpoint of this script is going to be, right?
mhm.
And I am excited about it. Like it's a big twist of events. It's fucking dark, and sends things in a completely different direction.
Tailspin. Yeah.
Um, and but in my mind, like I know that's gonna wind up on page 55 or 60 most likely. And then I know what my ending is, and I've kind of just been filling in pieces around that, right? And I don't really care too much about the structure aside from that. But like for me, like those are almost like the tent poles that it's hanging on, you know,
Right.
and it that's supporting it. But I definitely am thinking of it as like a midpoint, and I actually think in 4 acts. I don't think in 3. Like I always think like, you know, you've got your first act, and then you've got, you know, that act break to that midpoint, and then that midpoint to the act break for the third act, and so on.
Is that from the
Um,
theater? The 4 act structure? Does that
well, I
come
don't
from?
know.
Yeah.
I think no, you know what? I think it's just something that kind of evolved for me, honestly. Like I know people do that. Like I'm not the first person to think in 4 acts.
Yeah.
But
It just seems like a
probably
very typical thing. Like when I, go see a play or something, you've got the 2 acts, there's a break, and then there's like 2 final acts, and then you're out, you know?
yeah, I don't know. I think like maybe 4 or 5 scripts ago, I just found like the power in having a really great, you know, powerful turning point in the middle of a script that just
Yeah.
sends it in a completely different direction.
Mhm.
And I kind of came to love that. And so since that just happened to be in the middle, it was like, well, you know, kind of hard to think of the whole thing as 3 acts.
You know who does that a
So,
lot? Aaron Sorkin.
oh, really?
Aaron
Huh. I didn't
Sorkin
know
does
that.
that a lot. If you read the pilot for The Newsroom,
Mhm.
there's just
God,
his
that was such a great show. I can't believe
wasn't
it
it
didn't keep going. So
I
good.
it was really wonderful. And yeah, he's got his sort of Sorkin shtick, but like,
Yeah,
my God,
but it's
it's so
enjoyable. Great.
good. Yeah, no, it's like,
So,
if anyone could write that well, like it's just you could do whatever the hell you want, in my
yeah.
opinion. But if you study the Newsroom, he spends the first half, which I would say, I guess, would apply to what you're saying, like these first 2 acts, sort of building on the storyline, the introducing all of the characters, and then introducing all of the conflicts within and amongst the characters.
Mhm.
And it escalates and it escalates, and then all of a sudden a character comes into the story and says, this just happened, I think it was like the BP oil spill or something like that. Boom. So all of a sudden chaos breaks out in the newsroom, because they now they have to cover this massive story, and everybody's scrambling to sort of rally around this, reporting this event. And that came at exactly at the midpoint, so there's so much chaos and personal stuff happening with the main characters, and then he introduces this external event, and then the whole thing just rides out to this perfect ending, and it's like, my God, you're fucking talented. Like, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm definitely not claiming to be Aaron Sorkin, but I think they're like, I do like that. Like, I like, you know, fucking with expectation a little bit by doing that, and like having something that kind of comes early. Like the the script that I broke in on Aftermath. And what's funny is the notes that I got later ironed this out, but I so it's like the
they,
script that
they beat it
it's a
out of
script
us all
that
the
like,
time, don't they?
did you ever read any versions of that? I don't know.
When I,
It was like Die Hard on a Bridge. But
no, no, I never did read that one.
no worries, you don't need to. But like, so I killed the protagonist's wife at the midpoint. Like, like he's supposed to be saving his family, and I
Yeah,
killed his wife, and he's still got his daughter left, right? So like, but like
right.
that was fucking
That's
dark for
so
like your
awesome.
action, like, like, and so I killed his wife, and it just sent everything reeling, right? And what's funny is, so then we attached a couple producers, and they wanted me to take that out before we took it to studios because they just felt like it was too dark.
Of
And
course
so I
they.
took it out. But
I
then
yeah.
all the studios passed. I got a bunch of generals and shit, but all the studios passed. I thought the script was dead. My manager thought it was dead. 2 months later, Adi Shankar calls my manager and says, I want to get this script. And I found out he read the original draft where the wife died. Like,
Easy.
so, like, and that was the script that made him want to like option it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Like, I like that. Like, I like just doing something that completely subverts expectations.
I like a bold choice. You read my first act of this
Yeah.
feature film that I intend to direct. You know that there is a big surprise around page 20 that, I hope I set up well, but
Yeah, totally.
the characters that I introduce, we think they are a group of people, and then it turns out they're not, and I don't know. And I feel like when you have a moment like that, I think a moment like that should come at every film, especially the ones that you know, are genre stories. Like you have to have a big moment like that. I love that you did that at the midpoint. But I feel like you could also, depending on the story that you're telling, you can also do it like earlier, or you could do it even later, you know, like Shyamalan
Well,
does.
it's a
I
completely
know.
different story, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, and yes, you definitely can, you know. So I think if you're reading Save the Cat, I haven't read it in years, but I still fucking have it. And so if you're reading Save the Cat, I think Save the Cat would tell you to kill the wife if you're going to kill her at like page 80, right before you go into the second act. You want to, like, you know, make your protagonist hate life so that you can build him back up for a big ending, right? And then you could also kill the wife in act 1 or even in the first 10 pages. And then now you've got this emotional need that's driving them. And both of those are completely, you know, they're completely acceptable ways to do something. I mean, you can build great stories out of that. But yeah, for some reason, I don't know, I'm just drawn to doing things like that at the midpoint. And I
But
don't really have a good reason for why.
did you outline that with the 4 acts that you were talking about? Like, is
Yeah.
that,
Yep.
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think that was the second script I did that with.
Yeah. I like also the outlining part of it when I am outlining something that I'm very passionate about, because for me, like, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, all the heavy lifting of the storytelling happens in a 10-page document. Or I mean, some people get extensive. I know that there are people who do like 70-page outlines for their feature film, or sometimes
Yeah, I've never actually, I did do that once and that script was horrible. I'll never show that to anybody. So
well, at that point I feel like you might as well write a novel, you know. But no, well, but whatever works. I mean, there's no really right or wrong way, and there's not an official format for storytelling, I think. But I have seen friends of mine who have you know, sent me scripts or outlines to read, and I'll read their outline, and they'll have the thing where act 1, you know, opening image pages 1 through 3 or whatever, and then they'll do the thing, and then a little later it's like, you know, this happens pages 7 to 11, and I'm like, how the fuck do you know what page this is going to land on? Like, that just, to me, that feels like you're writing a, like an essay for the SATs. It feels like homework. It doesn't feel like storytelling.
do they make it work though, or like?
I mean, some of them do, but I'll be honest, a lot of times I feel like sometimes those feel like paint by the numbers, you know?
Yeah.
And I
mean,
think
I've had, sorry, go ahead.
well, I think, you know, a lot of us have the idea that, you know, there's all these different roads that ultimately lead to the same destination. We're all just trying to tell the story, get to the end of the script, and do a good job of it if possible. So yeah, there's no right or wrong way, but that just has never worked for me.
Yeah, I don't like it when it's that strict either. Although I've certainly had notes that have asked for those things, like we need this to happen by page 20, you know. And you know, and then if you get the notes, you make it work. But
Right.
it doesn't feel natural to me to do it that way either. But I think I probably am, you know, a little more married to plot points than you are from what you were telling me. But I really kind of like what you were talking about, just like these 10-page crescendos. I think that's really interesting, and it's at least going to give me something to think about in terms of, you know, how I approach this next one, which is really cool.
Well, and here's another thing about doing the 10-page increments as well. Instead of getting overwhelmed, and especially this happens to me when I'm writing a screenplay sometimes, right? Because I'm like, I don't want to overwrite, or I don't want to, I don't know. I feel like if I just focus on it as thinking about it as 10 pages, then that day that I'm at the computer, right? My job is to just work on those 10 pages. I'm not thinking about what happens on at the midpoint. I'm not thinking about what happens in the break into the third act or whatever. I'm not thinking about the ending. I'm thinking about these 10 pages, and do I have enough, you know, meat on the bones of the characters to make them come alive? Is the plot in this 10-page span still at the forefront of the story? Is that still relevant? You know, it's basically useful to me because I am able then to break down the totality of the storyline and the totality of the movie, and just focus on those pages, you know?
Yeah, you know what? And as I'm thinking of it, so again, like the pacing of that thing, just it was so good. And like that to me explains that, because if you're just focused on 10 pages at a time and like building those 10 pages up to an exciting, conclusion before it sends the story on to the next 10.
Right.
If you're just focusing on those 10, like it's going to be very hard, I think, for your script to get boring, which is like at the end of the day one of the most important things. Like I don't think it's talked about enough, but like, although actually I was just listening to a podcast with a Script Notes podcast where they literally just talked about that. But I don't think that you hear that often in general. But not being boring is like one of the biggest parts of the job. Like, and
Right.
it's like,
right.
yeah, you can develop the most complex characters and the most beautiful arcs and the most incredible symbolism, right? But like, if your story drags, people aren't gonna like it, like.
No, it's true. And I mean, even when you get to, well, I mean, and it's all, but do you feel like it's also very genre dependent? Because I feel like, like if you take a filmmaker, like Pedro Almodovar or Luca Guadagnino, I mean, these guys are doing like art house cinema,
their
which is
stuff doesn't drag. Like it's
doesn't
still
drag.
You're engaged the entire time,
They're compelling characters,
Right. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I can think of so many, slow building, dramas or whatever, but that still are engaging the entire time, right? But I can also think of plenty that have kind of bored me for good long sections, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, that was all right, it's all right. So
well, like Roger Ebert once said, he said like, if it's a great movie, if it's 3 hours long, can feel like 90 minutes, and a terrible, boring movie, if it's 90 minutes, can feel like 3 hours. So
yeah, man. Well, cool. Well, thank you for giving me some really good shit to think about. I appreciate it. Any other advice as I'm kind of moving into this outlining process? Aside from write something more marketable than your story about two women set in a period piece. And
no, listen, it's ridiculous that the marketplace is constantly trying to impose on us, and they're always like, well, this is what's going to sell, and that's what's going to sell, and fuck you. Like, don't tell me what I'm interested in or not. Like I just finished watching all the Mission Impossible movies a couple of weeks ago, just because they're great movies. And then I turned around and then I watched Barbara Streisand's The Prince of Tides, which is such a like beautiful, slow film about, family drama and stuff like. So, yeah, write what you want to write what your heart is telling you to write, make it as good as possible, and don't bore me. So
good shit, man. Well, dude, it's awesome to catch up. By the way, incredibly exciting about the official invitation to submit for the Sundance Fellowship. So
thank you.
I will be absolutely crossing fingers for you, dude. That's super exciting. So
I appreciate that. I hope Sundance thinks it's as compelling a read as you thought it was. And
we'll see hey, I only read the first 30 pages. If you want to send me the rest so I can double check that for you, I'll be glad to do that too.
Yeah, I will. I'm actually going to spend the rest of my day working on that. So yeah.
But I'm really excited for you, man. I mean, that first 30 was killer. So
thank you.
I expect they'll enjoy it too, for sure.
I hope so.
Well, thanks for getting into this with me and doing it twice.
We had a practice run. It was fine.
Absolutely. Cool.
Good luck to you. I'm excited for this project. I really can't. I mean, I'm rooting you on. I can't wait to see you thrive and just take this to the next level. So I'm cheering you on, buddy.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Love that, dude. Huge thanks to Martin, not only for doing this, but for doing it twice. I still can't fucking believe I did that. Yeah, like I was saying to Martin, right after we finished up, I dug into my outline, and I started with a piece of paper and drew 3 lines across it. So basically just visually breaking it up into 4 acts, and I knew what my midpoint was and what my opening or beginning was and what my ending was. And so I kind of had those to start with, and then I just let my brain run wild and started just filling in the gaps. I kind of reread my Scratch document and all the notes and ideas that I had there, and and I went for it, and it became a super messy thing with lots of cross-outs and arrows and things written into the margins. And this is it, so this is probably about 7 hours of work, which is pretty fast. Bunch of notes and even like a little map thing on the back. But that right there, that's the movie. And I'm fucking stoked on it. Like, I feel like this is going to be something that's going to be really fun to write, and hopefully really fun to read and watch afterward. So yeah, it's super cool. I'm really excited to have that done and to be kind of ready to move that thing into digital form. It went quickly, I think, because of all these different things that I was doing to lead up to it. So, I spent a lot of time working on this scratch doc and filled that with pages and pages and pages of ideas. And then I took that idea from Joe Johnson and had my characters talk to each other. And that definitely helped me just discover some of their motivations that absolutely drove some of the scenes in there. And then, there were gaps where I got stuck. And so I thought about Martin's 10-page crescendos and just where I could kind of build a 10-page segment to, some sort of exciting climax to drive the movie forward. And that was super helpful as well. And, that's part of what's been so cool about doing this series, is just connecting with other writers and just taking bits and pieces of their processes and trying them out and incorporating them into my own. And man, I know, I keep on saying how every one of these writers is awesome and great at what they do. And that's just because they are. And I'm so grateful to get to connect with all them. So speaking of awesome writers, coming up next week is Dalen Musson, who is another writer on The Falcon and The Winter Soldier, and also has a lot of experience outside of that in features, and just somebody that I can't wait to talk to. So make sure you subscribe to check that one out. For those of you doing this along with me, here are the steps for week 7. Number 1, read a script. You knew that was coming, but seriously, read one. Read something from another writer and give them notes. Read something in line with what you're writing, but read something. Number 2, study a movie structure. Take a movie, rip it apart. Read the script, watch the movie, watch that movie with a timestamp on, and take down notes about what's happening in every single scene to just drive that movie forward. It doesn't need to be something in line with what you're writing. Like Martin was saying, Whiplash was based off of a horror movie structure, and that's part of what made it so cool and unique. But yeah, pick a movie and just really study it in depth. Number 3, start your actual outline. It does not need to look like this. It doesn't need to look like anything that Martin described or that Joe described, but you do need to start it, and you need to put time into it. I recommend at least 60 minutes a day. In a couple weeks, we're going to be starting pages, and you want to be ready for that. So that's it for week 7. Congratulations to Johnny O'Sullivan. You have won yourself an autographed copy of Malice and Mistletoe, signed by myself and by Jack Purcell. I'm giving away another one of those this week. To win it this week, you just need to comment below what movie you watched and what you learned from its structure. I'll pick one of you, and I'll send a copy of Malice and Mistletoe your way. So listen, I am trying to make this thing the most valuable screenwriting resource that I possibly can, which means just making it as transparent as I possibly can. And a big part of that is I want to cap it all off, because I'm writing the script from start to finish and showing you every step of the way. I really want to be able to do a live streamed reading with actors of the final, finished, polished script. I can't do that unless I've got 1,000 subscribers. So please subscribe, and if you're getting value out of this, share it with a friend who you think will get some value out of it too. Share an episode, share the channel, share it on Facebook, share it on Reddit. Make a sandwich board and put it on your dog. I don't care. But if you could please share it, it would mean a lot to me. So thanks so much for checking this out, everybody. Dalen Musson's up next week. It's going to be awesome. So I'll see you then. Happy writing. Smash cut to black.